Greetings to you. I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about the subject of defence spending, defence doctrine, military and naval, so on and so forth. Things that seem to have come back on the front burner. Something that we've really haven't discussed as a nation now for really quite some time, and it's popping back onto the agenda. Usually, I have to say, for the wrong reasons, but leaving that aside for the time being. What I want to do now is just explain things as I view them and what needs to be done. And just so I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, I'm not the man in the golf club bar who has a view on defence and military spending or the dog and duck or whatever it is. Most views are expressed, whether it's politicians or civil servants or sadly these days senior officers, on whether the concept of geopolitical military strategy and doctrine is ill-informed. It's ill-informed. And so consequently, nobody you really listen to, whether it's on radio or TV or whatever it happens to be, or reading the newspapers, actually knows what they're talking about. It used to be known that, if you remember, Claire Hollingworth and John Keegan and people of that ilk, who were really very senior people who really know their stuff and had written lots and lots of books and so on and so forth. And their view was well worth listening to when it comes to geopolitical doctrine and so on and so forth. I've given papers at the Washington Defence University and the Association of, or the Royal College of Defence Studies and the Joint Service Staff Colleges at Sheridan, and I've written lots and lots of pieces, some of which are on my website, on this very subject. So the reason I say this is not to blow my own trumpet, it's just to let you know I'm not the golf club gobshite who's always got a view, normally badly or uninformed or ill-informed. So let me just start with where we need to sort ourselves out. At the end of the day, the politicians must drive the defence strategy. They have to drive the strategy because it's a civilian responsibility in a democracy, and it's just the same in Western Europe and it's the same in North America, which I'll come on to in a minute. Now, we are sadly still, and it's just the nature of the beast, it seems to me, fighting previous wars. And it's been a problem that we've had for many years. We think, will the next war, we assume the next war will be like the last one. It never is. It never is. The Americans are finding out now they're getting duffed up by the Iranians because they didn't do their homework and they've got the wrong kit. And they've been spending $1 trillion a year on stuff that doesn't work or is straight out of the ark. You know, I mean, aircraft carriers and aircraft carrier groups have frankly been out of date since Okinawa. They're just yesterday's weapon. It is like, and they're finding out now in the Middle East, the Americans, in fact, the Western world is finding out just how useless all that sort of stuff is. It's a little bit like the Battle of Ilundi in the Zulu Wars, where very highly disciplined Zulu forces, very well led and very brave, fought basically with a shield and an assegai, and excellent formations and tight battlefield formations. And it paid very good dividends at the Battle of Isandlwana. But of course, when they got to Ilundi and various other battles, they came up against artillery. And consequently, they lost the battles after that without hardly scoring a single point against the opposition. And it was the same in the Sudan a bit later. So it was the wrong kit at the wrong time, and military countries have been making this mistake for some time. Now, we've spent nearly all our defence budget on aircraft carriers in the last decade or two, and I wrote an article at the time saying what a disastrous mistake that was. And it's not what we want. Aircraft carriers are a projection of force. And it's generally accepted by most by most military lecturers, whether they agree with me or not, they probably don't. It's a projection of force. An aircraft carrier is a projection of aggression. It isn't a defensive mechanism at all. And I would argue, since we lost our empire, or gave away our empire, which is what we actually did, or had the empire kicked from under us by the Americans, our so-called friends, they're not. So this is the problem we have. Now we are an island off Europe, and we still have the same problems, but they're in a different format. So we need to think about defence. and the Ministry of Defence needs to actually understand what it's there for. It's defence of the realm. Politicians' primary responsibility, and the king and everybody else, is defence of the realm. We should not be involving ourselves in other people's wars. And other people's wars are anything that isn't a threat directly to us. And I hear such nonsense talked about when it comes to the Middle East, when it comes to these matters of the Ukraine and the Russian Federation, that they draw analogies from Germany in the 1930s, which are completely historically inaccurate. And that is the mistake that we make. And that means that we spend a lot of money on the wrong weapons and the wrong development of our army, so on and so forth. So that's what we need to be thinking about. Now, ask yourself, and I see some of the comments on some of my reels by and by, there are people, again, it's always the chap in the dog and duck or the golf club bore who simply cannot accept that the Russian Federation today isn't a manifestation of what the Third Reich was in the 1930s. It's just not the case. They're also not the same as they were in the Soviet Union, which collapsed, in case you hadn't noticed. You'd be amazed at the number of people who comment on my channel who don't actually believe there's been any change since the collapse of the Soviet Union, which shows really that they're not worth listening to, or not worth even reading their comments, because they are so desperately ill-informed. The West is a basket case economically, and it's a basket case when it comes to defence. We do not need aircraft carriers. We do not need all the old stuff that we've spent so much money and are still spending money on, where we know just by looking at the Middle East and the problem with the Americans, Israelis and the Iranians, things have changed. It's all now about ballistic missiles. It's all about supersonic, hypersonic missiles, drones, interactive warfare, which to an extent we understood and we're beginning to learn towards the end of World War II. But this is about interaction. And of course, we're finding that now, as everybody in theatre, in the war theatre, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and the Americans are finding out that it's not like it was in the last war. It's completely changed. So they've got all the wrong kit. They've got the wrong training. They've got the wrong doctrine. So this is one of the problems that we have, and nobody's addressing it because nobody has the expertise. And we've lost Claire Hollingworth and John Keegan from the Daily Telegraph, and people who really set their stall out in a free press, explaining how many bees made five. And you can go back to the Crimean War and Billy Russell and the Thunderer back into the 1850s, where war correspondents could actually be a very good force for good. We have none now. We don't have any now. And they're never on TV. Even if we had them, they wouldn't get onto TV because there's one thing that the mantra now is the big bogeyman on the planet. The bogeyman is the Russian Federation and Iran. This is simply not the case. And you have to get that. Everybody has to get that in their head. We are not under threat from the Russian Federation or Iran or indeed any other sovereign state that I know of. We are under massive threat by immigration, mass immigration, illegal immigration, which are landing at Dover. So there's no point in having aircraft carriers or destroyers or frigates, all of which are laid up at the moment, or submarines even, when the enemy is landing on our shores on the south coast, coming from France and Belgium. That's the threat to you and your wife and your children, your family and your daughters. It's on our doorstep now as we speak. So we don't need all these wonderful weapons and gizmos and all the rest of it. What we need is fast boats, Royal Marines, and political will, and junior leadership of a very high standard. That's what we need. And that should be our doctrine, and that's where our spending should go. And incidentally, it'd be interesting if you work out the numbers, and I made this point to the London School of Economics, where I was lecturing a few years ago on the anniversary of the Great War, 1918, the finish of the Great War. The problem is that it's not expensive, all right? It's expensive. Aircraft carriers cost billions. The F-35A, which incidentally doesn't seem to be very good either, costing something like about £500 million to throw, which are getting blown up at the rate of sort of one a day at the moment. This is the sort of thing that we're looking at. They cost billions and billions. But Royal Marines, properly trained Royal Marines and support vessels, in Royal Naval tugboats and stuff like that. And there's a whole doctrine that needs to be changed. We need to think about this to defend our shores. and political will. So this business of needing 5% of GDP and all that kind of thing is simply not true. We don't. We can defend ourselves very comfortably, thank you very much, with what we're spending now. It just needs to be spent in the right place. And if we're spending 2% or 2.5% of GDP, which is broadly speaking the figure, and GDP is a hopeless case anyway, but I don't want to go down that route explaining GDP and its follies. But we can do that. We can do that within budget. We can do that within budget. And all we need to do is get our act together, and we have to get rid of wokery. We have to change the way of training people. And we certainly have to get rid of the politicisation of the police, because it's in aid of the civil power, basically, is what we used to call it in my old army days. It's in aid of the civil power. That's what we do, in aid of the civil power. So that's what needs to happen. We need to get all that together. And we could do that, fascinating enough, we could do that really quickly. We could do that within weeks. We could do it within weeks. And we could defend our shores in that way, and we can withdraw by spending money as we do, supporting what is already a lost war in the Ukraine, and antagonising the Russian Federation, which has no hostile intentions towards our country at all. But they will have if we go on giving intelligence to the Ukrainians, selling them missiles or giving them missiles, Storm Shadow and all the rest of it, and advocating, as Lord Cameron was doing only the other day, and other people, that we need to strike deeply into the Russian Federation. And then, of course, they'll say, just a minute, where are these weapons being built? Where's this intelligence coming from? We know who they are and where they are, and then they will take action. But that's because we prod the bear. And I did Professor Donnelly's course, it was many years ago, the situation hasn't changed dramatically strategically in his Soviet studies course, exactly how they think and what they think and where they are. You've got to understand how the Russians feel, the Russian Federation feel. They believe a NATO Ukraine is an existential threat. Now, don't get in a high horse, don't start worrying about, oh, well, this is wrong, this is nonsense. This is how they think. It may not be how you think, but we don't care about what you think, we've got to care about what the foeman thinks. And it's the same with Iran. They regard it as an existential threat. The wars that are being started against them, and they are being started against them. Israel, America started this silly war. And we all know that, don't we? But of course, nobody's prepared to actually admit it in the press or even in politics, because everybody's a Zionist. Everybody's a Zionist. You will get nowhere in politics in this country unless you are a confirmed Zionist. Every single senior member of every political party has had to say, I'm a Zionist, I'm a confirmed Zionist, including, of course, Reform have just started Friends of Israel. No good comes of that kind of thing. We cannot go to war for other people. We have to wind our neck in and just look after our own. And that's what defence should be about, which is why it's called defence. The Americans have changed their name now from the Minister, their equivalent of Ministry of Defence, to the Ministry of War. We don't want a Ministry of War. We don't want war. War never serves good purpose. I'm not a pacifist or anything like a pacifist. And sometimes you have to fight a war. But most of the wars that we fought in our history have not been necessary. You could go back to the War of the Spanish Succession and work it on from there. What wars actually mattered? Now, the war with Argentina, they actually invaded a piece of British colony with the Union Jack over it, and they had no business to it. Never been part of Argentina at all, if you do your history, which nobody seems to have done. If you do that, you'll find that that's nothing to do with Argentina. They're just an aggressive fascist nation who wanted to take over a near neighbour. Sounding familiar? Sounding familiar in the Middle East? A fascist nation wanted to just take over all their neighbours? Well, I'll leave that with you. So we had to fight that war. Some wars we have to fight because we have to put a marker down on what people can and cannot do. But other people's wars thousands of miles away are nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with us. If the Ukraine wants to fight the Russians, that's their business, not ours. All right? Nothing is our business unless it's a direct threat to our country. And please don't take these analogies from the Third Reich because they just don't work. All right. And if you dig down in your history, you'll find that what we were told pre-war and post-war isn't true now. Now the figures come out, the numbers come out, isn't true either. So just let's get that in our heads and let's see how this government manages to make a complete total holics of their defence doctrine. In some ways, and I'm slightly hesitant to say this, it might be just as well that we have let our armed forces decay for the last 30 years. Maybe it's a good thing, because I don't believe that we're under any existential threat from anybody else. And had we had a functional navy and a functional army, we would probably have gone into this war in Iran as we did with the war in Iraq, to our detriment. Most of the wars that have been fought since 1945 have been a waste of time and money and young men's lives, and millions of civilians. War never works. Let's get back to diplomacy. Let's all start talking to each other. Jaw is better than war. So let's just face these facts and get about our business. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.